There is a fear inside you that you did not learn. The fear of the dark, the startle reflex at a sound in the trees, the way your eyes track a movement at the edge of vision before your mind has caught up. You did not pick those up from a film or a parent or a story you were told as a child. They came pre-installed, written into the body across 7 million years of being eaten. The leopards, the crowned eagles, the man-eating crocodiles, the giant short-faced hyenas, the false sabretooths, they shaped the species you are tonight. You are the descendant of those who survived all of them, and the survival is still in you. Settle in for the story of what made us, and do me a small favor, tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from. Let's begin from the very beginning. Part 1. The Inversion. In the year 1924, in the dust of a limestone quarry in the high country of South Africa, a worker named M. de Bruin picked up a small fossil from a heap of blasted rubble. He had been clearing rock for the cement furnaces at the Buxton Lime Works, and the small skull was, by any reasonable measure, just another piece of debris in a daily flood of debris. He set it aside. Eventually it travelled, in a wooden crate stuffed with packing wool, by post and rail, to the office of a young anatomist in Johannesburg named Raymond Dart. Dart had been waiting his whole career for an object like this one. He cleaned the matrix from the fossil with knitting needles. He compared it, bone by bone, against the skulls of every primate he could lay hands on. In 1925, in the journal Nature, he announced what he had found. He named it Australopithecus africanus, the southern ape of Africa. The specimen would become known the world over as the Town Child. It was, by the best modern dating, around 2.8 million years old. It had died at roughly 3 years of age. Its eye sockets were small and forward-facing. Its skull was the size of an apple. For most of the next century, the Town Child was the face of human origins. It appeared on textbook covers. It looked, in photograph after photograph, calm, almost peaceful, the wide-eyed infant ancestor of every person who has ever lived. School children the world over recognized it before they recognized most living animals. The textbooks placed it gently on a sun-bathed plain, surrounded by acacia trees and grazing herbivores, the small patient herald of a story that would end with us. There was a problem with that story. The Town Child did not die quietly in its sleep. The Town Child was eaten. In 2006, the paleontologists Lee Berger and Ron Clark published a reanalysis of the damage on the type specimen. The marks, they argued, were not the product of a casual fall or careless excavation or scavenging hyenas. They were the marks of a bird of prey. Berger followed up in 2009 with a tighter analysis. Punctures behind the eye sockets, scratches along the skull, and a pattern of damage that matched, almost exactly, the kind of damage left by modern crowned eagles on the skulls of the monkeys they take from the canopy. The most famous fossil child in the world had not been a wandering small ancestor at all. The most famous fossil child in the world had been carried into the sky in the talons of a raptor. That reanalysis is the doorway into the question this episode is going to explore for the next 2 hours. Because if the Town Child was eaten, and the Town Child is not a strange anomaly, but a representative case, then the textbook story has been telling us the wrong story. For at least the first 5 million years of hominin existence, our ancestors were not the hunters. They were the hunted. Set the picture for a moment. The Pleistocene of Africa was not a cradle, it was a slaughterhouse with patches of beauty. Imagine a mosaic of woodland and open grass, of riverine forest along seasonal channels, of lake margins fringed with reeds, of broken outcrops where small hominins could climb when they were lucky enough to see what was coming. Now imagine the predators that lived in every layer of that mosaic: leopards in the cover, lions on the open ground, at least 3 species of saber-toothed cat, Megantherion, Homotherium, and the strange, medium-sized Dinophelis. Crowned eagles in the canopy, with talons that could pierce a primate skull, pythons heavy enough to constrict a small adult ape, crocodiles in the rivers that grew, in some places and times, to 7 and 8 meters long, hyenas with bone-cracking jaws that could process a femur the way a modern dog processes a chicken bone. Now imagine your ancestor. An adult Australopithecus stood about 1.25 meters tall and weighed somewhere between 30 and 40 kilograms, about the size of a chimpanzee, but with a smaller face, a flatter chest, and feet built for the ground rather than the canopy. No claws, no fangs, no projectile weapons of any kind. Bipedal, but not fast over distance and slower than every cat in its world. This was the animal whose textbook portraits we look at and call our ancestor. This was the animal whose nights were spent in trees because the alternative was death. It was the paleontologist C.K. Bob Brain who first laid out in detail what this meant. In his 1981 book, The Hunters or the Hunted, Brain went bone by bone through the cave deposits of South Africa and asked the simple question that no one had asked properly before. How did all these hominin bones get into these caves? The answer he found, and the answer subsequent generations of paleontologists have only refined, is that the bones were brought there by the predators that ate them. The cave was not a home, the cave was a larder. 2.5 decades later, the anthropologists Donna Hart and Robert Sussman extended the argument across the whole of primate evolution in a book they titled simply Man the Hunted. Take a moment with that title. For 100 years, paleoanthropology has had a foundational book called Man the Hunter. Lee and DeVore's 1968 symposium of the same name canonized the view that hunting is what made us human, that cooperative meat-getting drove the growth of our brains, the use of tools, the structure of language, the long patterns of our social life. And there is real evidence behind that story when it comes to the late Pleistocene. But for the first 5 million years of hominin time, most of who we are, most of where we came from, the more accurate title is the inverse, Man the Hunted. Or, more precisely, given that most of those millions of years our ancestors were not yet Homo sapiens at all, ape the hunted, cousin the hunted, mother and father of all of us, the hunted. And so, over the next 2 hours, we are going to walk through what that meant. We are going to enter the South African caves where leopards filled the bone records. We are going to stand in the morning at Olduvai Gorge, where a man-eating crocodile of 7 meters or more rose from the reeds. We are going to stalk Dmanisi in the Caucasus with a clan of giant short-faced hyenas. We are going to meet the medium-sized cat that one paleontologist proposed as our specialist predator, the false saber-toothed Dinophelis. We are going to climb at dusk into trees with a band of Australopithecines and listen to the night come on. And we are going to watch, slowly, across the long arc of 2 million years, our species learn how to fight back. But before we move into the wider story, there is one specific case I want you to see clearly. There is one fossil in one cave that ended an entire era of self-flattery in paleoanthropology. There is a juvenile skull with 2 clean punctures spaced with the precision of a manufactured tool. The animal that made the punctures was not extinct. It was not exotic. It was, and is, common. It is still killing people in the modern world. And it left, on a single bone fragment, the fingerprints of an entire era of how the human story actually unfolded. We are going to look at that fossil first. Part 2. The skull with 2 holes. The cave is called Swartkrans. It sits north of Johannesburg on the South African Highveld in a dolomite formation cut through with ancient fissures. From above, on the surface, you would not know it was there. The ground is unremarkable scrub. But the rock has been hollowed by water and time into a network of vertical and angled passages, and into those passages, over hundreds of thousands of years, bones have fallen. The man who taught us how to read those bones was C. K. Brain, known to colleagues and to the small community of African paleontology simply as Bob. Brain was a careful, meticulous, slightly old-fashioned scientist of the Transvaal Museum, the kind of researcher who would spend a decade on a single question because the question deserved a decade. From the 1960s through the 1980s, he excavated Swartkrans systematically. He counted, photographed, described, and compared every bone fragment. And one of those bone fragments was a juvenile skull catalogued as SK54. SK54 is a piece of a parietal, the upper side bone of the cranium, from a young individual of Paranthropus robustus, one of the robust Australopithecines that lived in southern Africa around 1.8 million years ago. The fragment is small enough to sit in your palm. What makes it astonishing are two clean near-circular puncture wounds on its outer surface. They are not random damage. They are not crush marks from rockfall. They are spaced in a precise relationship to each other, and they have the smooth, slightly beveled edge that comes from a tooth driven through living bone. Brain did the obvious thing first. He measured the spacing of the two punctures. Then he started comparing. He measured the canine tooth spacing of every large carnivore that had ever lived in southern Africa during the relevant time window: lion, hyena, cheetah, saber-toothed cat, hunting dog, leopard. He compared modern animals when he could and referenced fossils when he could not. Only one match was tight: the leopard. And then Brain did something that turned the comparison into a demonstration. He took the lower jaw of a fossil leopard from the same Swartkrans deposit, specimen SK349, and he held the lower canines of that jaw up to the punctures in SK54. The teeth slipped into the holes within a millimetre or two. The match was so exact, so uncannily perfect, that the photograph of the two specimens together became one of the most reproduced images in modern paleoanthropology. Anyone who has ever taken a serious course in human evolution has seen that pairing. What it shows is straightforward and devastating. A leopard killed this child. The leopard bit the back of the small head with its lower canines, in the standard way modern leopards bite small primates. The child was carried, dangling, the back of its skull in the leopard's jaws. It was carried, very probably, into a tree. This last detail is the one that opens up everything else. Because Swartkrans, like Sterkfontein and Kromdraai and Drimmelen and most of the famous South African fossil sites, is a network of fissures opening at the surface. 2 million years ago, there were trees on the Dolomite ridges above those fissures. Modern leopards habitually drag prey into trees to consume it away from the harassment of hyenas and lions. A leopard in a tree above a fissure eating a Paranthropus child is going to drop pieces of that child into the fissure below. Skull fragments, limb bones, teeth. Over years and centuries and tens of thousands of years, that pattern of dropped pieces is going to fill the cave with the bones of leopard prey. Most of the famous early hominin fossils of southern Africa, Brain showed, accumulated like that. Pause for a second on what this means. The popular image of Paranthropus or Australopithecus is the small upright ape walking out of a cave at dawn with its family. Some museum dioramas still show that scene, but the cave was not their home. It almost certainly was not. The cave was the place where what was left of them ended up after a leopard finished feeding. Australopithecus and Paranthropus were not cave dwellers. They were cave fillers. The animal that put them there had 4 legs and a spotted coat. This was a hard idea for the field to absorb when Brain first laid it out. Through the early 20th century, paleoanthropology had been telling itself a heroic story. Raymond Dart himself had imagined the Australopithecines as proto-humans wielding broken bones as weapons, butchering antelope, killing each other, beginning the long arc of the human relationship with violence as predator and warrior. He had given it a name, the osteodontocheratic culture, meaning culture of the bone, the tooth, and the horn. It is one of the most evocative phrases in 20th century anthropology. There is a wider catalogue of leopard predation evidence in the Swartkrans assemblage that is worth pausing on. SK54 is the most famous specimen, but it is far from the only one. Brain documented multiple Paranthropus and early Homo bones in the Swartkrans deposits with carnivore tooth marks consistent with leopard processing. Some show the characteristic crushed, long bone ends that occur when a leopard chews through the cancellous bone to extract marrow. Some show the paired puncture wounds of canine teeth on flat bone surfaces. Some show the dragging scratches that occur when a body is hauled through a tree branch. Across hundreds of fossil bone fragments, the signature is consistent. The Australopithecines and early Homo of Swartkrans were a regular component of the local leopard's diet across hundreds of thousands of years. It was also, Brain showed, almost entirely wrong. The bones Dart took for weapons were the remains of meals. The tooth marks were not from cooperative hunting parties. They were from the leopards and hyenas and saber-toothed cats that had done the hunting. The Australopithecines in those caves were not the warriors. The Australopithecines in those caves were the dinner. Bring this back, for a moment, to a single image. Imagine, at some moment in a long-vanished afternoon, roughly 1.8 million years ago, a Paranthropus child playing in low cover at the edge of a clearing on the Highveld. Maybe its mother is a few meters off, foraging. Maybe a sibling is in a low branch above. None of them sees the leopard. The leopard has been watching for a long time. The leopard, from cover, is 6 meters away. Modern leopards close that distance in less than a second. The bite is to the back of the head. It is fast and quiet. And then, with the small body limp in its jaws, the leopard climbs. And so the question this part leaves us with is not whether the leopard killed a hominin. The question is whether anything kept the hominins safe, anywhere, at any time, because the leopard came from the ground. And in the next part, we are going to look at the predator that came from the sky. Part 3. The Eye in the Sky. Return for a moment to the town child. 3 years old at death. 2.8 million years old. The skull that started the whole modern conversation about human origins, when Raymond Dart described it in 1925. For 80 years, that skull was treated as a peaceful object. Dart himself had argued, in his osteodontokeratic period, that the Australopithecines were proto-warriors. But the consensus that emerged through the middle of the 20th century was less violent. The town child was a small ancestor that had simply died and somehow ended up in a limestone cavity where it was preserved by the slow lithification of the matrix. Then Lee Berger and Ron Clark, working through the museum collections, began to look at the damage on the skull more carefully. They published their first reinterpretation in 1995. They expanded it in 2006. Berger followed up in 2009. And the picture they assembled has held up against every subsequent challenge. The damage on the town child is not the work of a fall. It is not the work of a hyena. It is not the work of a careless excavator's chisel. It is the work of a bird of prey. Specifically, the damage matches the diagnostic signature of a large eagle. Stop here for a moment, because most people are not used to thinking of eagles as predators of primates. The popular image of an eagle is the bald eagle on an American crest, the dramatic silhouette over a mountain valley, the dive on a fish. The reality, in Central Africa and the surrounding tropics, is more disturbing. The crowned eagle, Stephanoetus coronatus, is one of the most powerful birds of prey alive. Its wingspan is around 1.8 meters. Its talons close on prey with more force than any other living raptor of comparable size. It hunts, primarily, monkeys. In 1999, the primatologist William Sanders and his colleagues began documenting the bone assemblages found beneath active crowned eagle nests in Kibale National Park, Uganda. They published the work in the Journal of Human Evolution in 2003. What they found, in nest after nest, was a slowly accumulating collection of skulls and limb bones from local primates: vervet monkey, blue monkey, black and white colobus, even, in some cases, small forest antelope. What they also found was a diagnostic damage signature. Crowned eagles strike from above. They drive their talons through the skulls of their prey, often penetrating the bone behind the eye sockets, often piercing the orbital floor. They carry small primates whole. They dismember larger ones at the kill site or below the nest. The damage they leave on bone is distinctive, and it can be reliably distinguished from the damage left by any mammalian carnivore. The damage on the town child matches that signature. There are punctures behind the orbits. There are small perforations in the skull base. There are scratch marks consistent with the talons gripping the cranium during transport. The town child was not nibbled. It was not crushed. It was not buried by a flood. It was taken, alive or freshly dead, by a bird of prey, and it was carried. Try to picture it: a clearing on the edge of a Pliocene woodland 2.8 million years ago. The town child is at the edge of its band, perhaps drinking from a small pool, perhaps reaching for a fruit. The eagle has been watching for some time, perched on a high branch, scanning. When the moment is right, the eagle drops. Crowned eagles strike at 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. The first the child will know of the bird is the shadow and the impact, and that will be all. The talons close on the small skull. The bird's grip is enough to lift a 20-kilogram prey item. A 3-year-old Australopithecine is well within that envelope. What happens next builds the fossil record. The eagle returns to its nest in the canopy or on a cliff. It strips flesh and discards bone. Over generations of the same nesting site, a bone accumulation builds up beneath. If the site happens to sit above a fissure that, after long ages of dolomite weathering, will eventually become a famous cave, then the bones drop into the cave and become fossils. That is, in essence, the town child story. There is a footnote here, and it is one of the strangest in paleoanthropology. On Madagascar, until very recently in geological terms, there lived an even larger crowned eagle called Stephanoetus mahari. It went extinct only in the last 2,000 years. While it was alive, it hunted some of the giant lemurs that shared the island with it. Some of those lemurs were as big as small humans. Madagascar, in other words, gives us a recently active example of an eagle preying on hominoid-grade primates. The town scenario is not a freak occurrence. It is part of a pattern that has played out in different forests on different continents over millions of years. Let the implications settle for a moment. The textbook icon of human origins, the small infant face that has stared out from 1,000 classroom walls, was not a peaceful child. It was a meal in transit. Its skull was punctured by talons 60 centimeters apart. Its body was carried into a tree or onto a cliff. Its face is famous because the eagle dropped what was left. The lesson this tells us, if we are willing to hear it, is that hominins were not safe in any layer of their world. They were not safe on the ground, where the leopard waited. They were not safe at the edge of the canopy, where the eagle struck. They were not safe in cover, and they were not safe in the open. They had no defensive equipment of their own. They had bipedal posture, decent vision, modest brains, and each other. That last advantage, as we will see, would eventually be enough. But not yet, not for millions of years. For now, in this part of the story, the predators have it all their way, and the next predator is older than every other animal in the cast. Its lineage has been on this planet for over 200 million years. Its closest living relatives have not changed materially since the time of the dinosaurs. It is a creature that watched the KPG asteroid kill the non-avian dinosaurs and then went back to ambushing whatever drank from the river. Its modern descendants still kill more humans in Africa than lions and leopards and hyenas combined. And, in the Pleistocene, on the shore of the lake that became Olduvai Gorge, one species of it grew to the size of a city bus. Part 4. The Water Demons. Olduvai Gorge cuts across the Serengeti Plain in northern Tanzania like a long, narrow scar. From the rim, you can see the layers, beds of volcanic ash and sediment laid down between roughly 2 million and 1.5 million years ago, sandwiched together in a record that has produced more famous early hominin fossils than almost any other site on Earth. Mary and Louis Leakey worked Olduvai for decades. The site has produced specimens of early Homo and Paranthropus, stone tools by the thousands, and animal bones in volumes that would fill warehouses. It has also produced something that, until recently, paleoanthropology had not properly reckoned with. It has produced a species of crocodile. In 2010, the paleontologists Christopher Brochu, Jackson Nyao, Robert Blumenschein, and Llewellyn Densmore published a paper in PLOS 1 describing a new fossil crocodilian from the Olduvai beds. They named it Crocodilus anthropophagus. The specific epithet means simply man-eater. Few species names in modern biology are quite as unsubtle. The species was distinguished from other African crocodiles by a pair of horn-like protuberances above the eyes, a faintly demonic-looking feature that has earned it, in the popular press, the nickname horned crocodile. It grew to 7 and 8 meters in length. It weighed up to 1,000 kilograms. Its bite force, by modern crocodilian comparison, was in excess of 16,000 newtons, enough to crush a buffalo's femur, and far more than enough to amputate a human leg. It lived along the shore of the Pleistocene lake, whose deposits became Olduvai. It lived alongside our ancestors. The evidence that it ate them is direct. Jackson Nyao and Robert Blumenschein published in 2006 and again in 2012 a methodology for distinguishing crocodile feeding traces from those of mammalian carnivores. Crocodiles bite differently. Their teeth are conical rather than blade-shaped. They puncture and pull rather than slice. Their tooth marks are paired and circular. Their feeding behavior, including the famous death roll, leaves diagnostic drag and twist marks on bone surfaces. When Nyao and Blumenschein applied that methodology to the Olduvai hominin fossils, the marks were there. OH8, an Olduvai foot from a child belonging probably to early Homo, dating to around 1.75 million years ago, shows tooth marks consistent with crocodile feeding. OH35, a tibia and fibula of similar age, shows the same diagnostic signature. The marks are paired. They are bisected. They are exactly what a crocodile of the Crocodilus anthropophagus size class would leave on a hominin limb. Picture the scene. A small group of early Homo at the lake's edge, perhaps mid-morning, with shadows still long. Water is not optional for any animal on the savannah. The whole ecology orbits around the lake margin. The hominins approach to drink. The water is brown, opaque with sediment. The reeds do not move. Nothing visible breaks the surface. Underneath, an 8-meter crocodile has been waiting since before sunrise. The strike is silent and explosive. 1,000 kilograms of crocodile launches out of the water, jaws closing with 16,000 newtons of force around a leg. The hominin is yanked off its feet and into the water. Then the death roll, the crocodile spinning in the shallow water, tearing the limb free or twisting the body until the prey is too damaged to resist. Then a slow drag to deeper water, and finally a placement of the body under a submerged log where it will soften enough to be eaten over the following days. This was not a freak event. This was the routine cost of needing water. Olduvai Gorge has produced enough hominin fossils with crocodile traces and enough evidence that the lake margin was a daily destination that we have to assume the river edge ambush was a constant background risk for every hominin that ever drank. 5 million years of evolution under that risk leaves marks that are not all skeletal. The way modern people instinctively scan brown water before stepping in is, in part, a memory written in our species' nerves. The crocodilus lineage is among the oldest in the predator catalogue. Modern crocodiles are nearly identical in form to their ancestors of the Cretaceous. They were here before the asteroid. They were here when the non-avian dinosaurs vanished. They were here in essentially the same form when the first hominins began to walk upright in the East African Rift. They are still here now. They still kill several hundred people every year on the African continent, more than lions and leopards and hyenas combined. Reflect on that for a moment. Of all the predators we will look at in this episode, the crocodile is the only one whose Pleistocene threat is essentially identical to its modern threat. Lions are largely confined to protected reserves. Leopards have been pushed back. Cave bears and saber-toothed cats are extinct. Pythons are diminished. But the crocodile at the river's edge still does what the crocodile has always done. The Pleistocene is, in this one specific way, ongoing. Note also that crocodilians have remarkable parental behavior for a reptile. Females guard nests for months, gently move newly hatched young to water in the curve of their jaws, and respond to the calls of hatchlings even after a year or more. Crocodile mothers have been documented vocalizing to embryos through the eggshell. The animals are, by reptile standards, profoundly attentive parents. This is mostly irrelevant to the predation question, but it is a reminder that the animals our ancestors faced at the lake's edge were not unintelligent. They were slow, patient, sensorially capable, and capable of learning. A crocodile that had successfully ambushed a hominin once would, with some probability, return to the same waterhole and try again. When you sit with the fact that Crocodilus anthropophagus, the man-eating crocodile, was a real species described by real paleontologists from real fossils with real bite marks on real hominin bones, you are sitting with a piece of evolutionary continuity that does not require imagination. The Olduvai lakeshore is 2 million years gone. The Nile Delta is now. They are, biologically, the same scene. The most disturbing predator in our caste we have not yet met. It was a cat. It was medium-sized by carnivore standards and ordinary in body. What was not ordinary was its dentition. Its upper canines were elongated, but not as elongated as those of the true sabretooths. It was, in the words of one paleontologist, the false sabretooth. And one researcher, a careful, skeptical, even old-fashioned man, proposed that this medium-sized cat might have been the original specialist hunter of our lineage. We do not know if he was right. We have never been able to prove he was right, but we have also never been able to make the suspicion go away. Part 5. The false saber-tooth. The cat is called Dinophelis. The genus name means terrible cat from the Greek dinos. It lived in Africa and Eurasia from roughly 5 million to 1 million years ago. It was, by the standards of its predator guild, mid-sized, about the mass of a modern jaguar, between 90 and 120 kilograms. Its skull was strongly built, its forequarters powerful, and its upper canines were elongated and stocky, but not as elongated as those of the true saber-tooths, Meganterion, Smilodon, and the longer-toothed lineages. It was, in effect, the awkward middle child of the saber-tooth family. Not a pure conical-toothed cat like a leopard or a jaguar. Not a pure long-bladed saber-tooth like a Smilodon. Something in between. To understand why Dinophelis matters to our story, you need to look at the wider saber-tooth guild that overlapped with hominin evolution. There were 3, sometimes 4, contemporaneous saber-tooth genera in the Pleistocene of Africa. Meganterion was the long-sabred true saber-tooth, a stocky cat the size of a leopard with 12-centimeter upper canines and a powerful neck. Homotherium was the so-called scimitar tooth, a longer-legged, more cursorial cat with shorter, serrated upper canines, evidently adapted to chase prey rather than ambush from cover. Dinophelis was the in-between cat. And in the Pleistocene, the New World saber-toothed smilodon would eventually appear, descended from earlier members of the same broad family. What singles out Dinophelis in the paleoanthropology literature is a hypothesis that comes back, again, to Bob Brain. In Brain's careful review of the cave taphonomy across South Africa, he kept noticing something. Dinophelis fossils kept turning up in the same deposits as hominin remains. Sterkfontein, Swartkrans, Kromdraai. Site after site, the cat appeared in the bone record in suggestive proximity to the bipeds. Brain proposed, cautiously but firmly, that Dinophelis might have been a hominin specialist. A cat, in other words, whose evolutionary trade was the killing of small, upright apes. It is a hypothesis that has refused to die in the half-century since Brain made it. And it is a hypothesis whose evidence has, it must be said, never been conclusive. Margaret Lewis and Lars Werdelin reviewed the East African Plio-Pleistocene Carnivore Guild in 2007. They found no clean signal that Dinophelis preferentially targeted hominins over other prey of similar size. The cat appeared to have eaten medium-sized antelope and other small mammals as readily as anything else. Most modern paleontologists would say, if asked, that the Dinophelis as hominin specialist hypothesis is unproven and probably overstated. But it persists. It persists because a medium-sized cat with stout sabers, an ambush hunter optimized for a kill against 40-kilogram prey, in an environment where 40-kilogram bipedal apes were a small but consistent part of the prey base, fits the description so well that the imagination cannot quite let go, and because the proximity in cave deposits, while not statistically conclusive, is not nothing. Indulge the speculation for a moment. Imagine, if Brain was right, what the world would have felt like for a Plio-Pleistocene hominin band. Most predators are opportunists. The leopard hunts whatever is convenient that night. The crocodile takes whatever drinks at the lake. The eagle takes whatever it sees in the canopy. But Dinophelis, if Brain was right, was a predator whose evolutionary trade specifically included your species. A cat that knew the shape of your shadow, the cadence of your footstep, the predictable patterns of where your kind slept and drank and foraged. Imagine being prey to that animal across 1 million generations. Imagine evolving under its pressure. We do not know whether the imagination is correct. The data are ambiguous, but the imagination is, in some ways, beside the point. Even if Dinophelis was not a specialist, the Plio-Pleistocene hominin lineage faced predator pressure of a kind no modern primate has to contend with. The South African caves alone preserve evidence of leopard, lion, saber-tooth, hyena, jackal, and crocodile predation on Australopithecines and early Homo. The pressure was constant. The pressure was multi-vector. The pressure was, by primate standards, exceptional. Step back for a moment to take in the scale of the larger predator guild that pressed on the hominin lineage. South Africa alone, in the Plio-Pleistocene, hosted the leopard, 2 species of lion, 3 saber-toothed genera, 2 species of hyena, including the bone-cracking giant Pachycrocuta, hunting dogs, jackals, the now extinct cheetah Acinonyx pardinensis, and several smaller carnivore species. East Africa added at least 2 further saber-tooth lineages, and the man-eating crocodile complex along its lakes and rivers. By any reasonable measure, the hominin of the Plio-Pleistocene faced a predator guild 3 to 5 times more diverse than the predator community any modern primate has to negotiate. Even modern chimpanzees, which lose perhaps a few % of their juveniles to leopards each year, live in a much less crowded predator field than our ancestors did. It gets worse, in one respect. When the first hominins began to leave Africa between roughly 2 million and 1.8 million years ago, they did not leave the predator problem behind. They walked into a Eurasian carnivore guild that contained its own saber-tooths, its own giant hyenas, its own bears. Megantherion and Homotherium were already in Eurasia, having dispersed earlier from African ancestors. The cave bear lineage was getting started. The Pachyrhinoceros giant short-faced hyena was at full strength. Wolves were plentiful. The early out-of-Africa hominins did not escape predation by leaving home. They met new predators in new biomes. It is to one of those out-of-Africa sites, and to one of those Eurasian predator guilds, that we are about to travel. We have spent the first 5 parts of this story in Africa, walking through the predators of our birthplace. We have looked at the eagle that took the town child. We have looked at the leopard that took SK-54. We have looked at the crocodile that took the Olduvai foot. We have looked at the medium-sized cat whose evolutionary diet may have specifically included our lineage. We have begun to see the shape of what it meant to be an Australopithecus on the African mosaic. Now we are going to follow our ancestors out of Africa for the first time. We are going to a place that did not have an obvious water source for them, that was higher than they were used to, that was colder than they had ever experienced. We are going to a fossil site in the modern Republic of Georgia that has, in the last quarter century, transformed our understanding of how hominins dispersed. The site is called Dmanisi. The hominins who lived there, briefly, did not have an easy time. The hyenas were waiting for them. The wolves were waiting for them. The sabretooths were waiting for them. And on at least some occasions, the predators won. Part 6. The hominins in the wolf den. The site sits on a promontory of basalt at the confluence of 2 small rivers in the modern Republic of Georgia in the southern Caucasus. A medieval citadel was built on top of it many centuries ago, its stone walls reusing the same defensible high ground. Beneath the citadel, dug into the volcanic soils that have preserved them for 1.8 million years, lie some of the most important hominin fossils ever recovered. The site is called Dmanisi. Dmanisi was discovered as an archaeological site in the 1930s. The fossil bonanza began in the 1980s when excavations beneath the citadel began turning up Pleistocene animal bones and stone tools. The first hominin fossil came in 1991. By the early 2000s, the team led by David Lord Kippenides had recovered 5 remarkable hominin crania, catalogued as D2280, D2282, D2700, D3444, and D4500. The fossils dated to roughly 1.85 to 1.77 million years ago. They were, and remain, the earliest hominins yet found outside Africa. There is debate about what species name they should carry. Some researchers prefer Homo erectus. Others have argued for the local name Homo georgicus. Others, again, have placed them as a regional variant of early Homo ergaster. The names matter less than the material fact. These hominins had walked, or whose ancestors had walked, all the way from East Africa across the Horn, up through the Levant and into the Caucasus. They had crossed mountains, they had crossed rivers, they had survived cold winters that nothing in their African evolutionary history had prepared them for. And then they had reached Dmanisi, and they had died there. The reason the fossils are so well preserved is, in part, the same reason most early hominin fossils are preserved at all. They were brought there by predators. The Dmanisi assemblage is saturated with carnivore remains. Bones of the giant short-faced hyena, Pachycrocota brevirostris, dominate the predator record. The saber-toothed meganterion is present. Wolves are plentiful. There are bears. There is a now extinct cheetah, Acinonyx pardinensis, larger and stockier than its modern descendant. The hominins are a small minority component of the assemblage, sandwiched in among the bones of their predators and the bones of the herbivores those predators ate. In a series of papers published from the late 1990s onward, Lord Kippenides, Reed Ferring, and a long roster of collaborators have built a detailed picture of the site's taphonomy. In 2020, Coyle and colleagues published an analysis of carnivore tooth marks on the Dmanisi hominin material. In 2022, Bartolini Lucenti and colleagues published an analysis of Pachycrocuta feeding behavior at the site. The picture that emerges is consistent and uncomfortable. The Dmanisi hominins were, on at least some occasions, prey for the local predators. Take a moment to look more closely at Pachycrocuta. The giant short-faced hyena was, in life, an animal of about 110 kilograms, roughly twice the mass of a modern spotted hyena. It had bone-cracking jaws, able to splinter and consume large herbivore bones, including bones that no modern hyena can process. It hunted in clans. It scavenged in clans. It dragged its kills to communal dens, where the bones accumulated. And the dens of Pachycrocuta, dating from 1.8 to 500,000 years ago, are scattered across the Pleistocene of Eurasia, frequently containing hominin material. Picture, then, a Dmanisi night, a small group of Homo erectus, 3 or 4 adults and a child, crossing high steppe in the late summer at the end of a long day's walk. The wind has picked up, the temperature has dropped. None of them has fire, or has perhaps lost a fire they were trying to keep, or has not yet learned how to control fire reliably at all. They look for cover. The cover, if they find it, has been there before them. A clan of Pachycrocuta uses the same overhang. A pair of Meganterion uses the same gully. The decision to climb a tree, when there is a tree, is the knight's last gamble. The hominin record at Dmanisi includes a remarkable individual, an old male identified from the cranium D3444, who had lost almost all his teeth before he died. The bone of his jaw had remodeled around the empty sockets, which means he survived without those teeth for a long time, perhaps years. He could not have chewed his own food. Someone in his band must have processed it for him. A toothless old man kept alive by his community is one of the earliest pieces of fossil evidence for human social care. He survived a long winter, several long winters. He did not survive forever. There is something hard to absorb about Dmanisi. These hominins had walked thousands of kilometers out of Africa and into a colder, harder, predator-saturated continent. They had succeeded long enough to die at one specific high promontory between 2 rivers in the Caucasus. Their bones lay in the same matrix as the bones of the carnivores that probably killed at least some of them. And those bones, 1800 millennia later, have given us the clearest evidence we possess that the human genus had, by this date, become a social, mutually supportive, mutually feeding species, and that the predators around them noticed. Dmanisi shows us something the African caves do not show us as cleanly. It shows us that when our ancestors moved into a new biome, the predators moved with them. Whatever continent we walked into, there was already a guild waiting. Hyenas in Eurasia, sabretooths in both, wolves on the steppe, bears in the forests. A few thousand years later in our story, lions in southern Europe and across northern China. The Pleistocene world, on every continent humans entered before South America, contained a dense predator community. And that predator community had us, alongside everything else, on the menu. Why, then, do we have any hominin fossils at all? Why have any of them survived in such numbers as to fill the museums of the world? The answer is, in many cases, exactly the reason they survived in the African cave deposits, because predators put them there. Without leopards, without hyenas, without crowned eagles, the fossil record of human origins would be far thinner than it is. We owe the bones we have, in large part, to the animals that ate them. And in the next part, we are going to look at how that strange, dark relationship between predator and paleontology actually works at the level of cave taphonomy itself. Part 7. The Cave Taphonomy Revolution. There is a deceptively simple question that runs underneath all of paleoanthropology. Why are most of the famous early hominin fossils from caves? It is worth pausing on. Most living primates do not die in caves. Most living humans do not die in caves. Caves are not where most of any animal's ordinary life takes place. So, why does the early hominin fossil record cluster in cave systems with such overwhelming consistency? Sterkfontein, Swartkrans, Kromdraai, Drimmelen, Malapa, Rising Star. The South African cast, in particular, is an almost continuous catalogue of cave-derived hominin fossils. The answer the field gave for most of the 20th century was that caves were where hominins lived. The picture was of small ancestors gathering in cave mouths, sleeping in cave shelters, eating their meals in caves, leaving their bones behind. It was a picture that fit the cultural expectations of the early 20th century, the cave-dwelling Neanderthal of 19th century reconstructions, the Flintstones cave family of mid-20th century cartoons. It was a picture that put hominins at the center of their own fossil records. It was almost entirely wrong. The man who showed it was wrong, again, was C.K. Bob Brain. In his 1981 book, The Hunters, or The Hunted, Brain went bone by bone through the cave deposits of South Africa and asked a different and more difficult question. Not where did the hominins live, but how did the hominin bones get into the cave? It is a small shift in framing. It changed everything. The starting point for Brain's analysis was a hypothesis Raymond Dart had laid out in the 1940s and 50s. Dart had looked at the bones in Makapansgat Cave and seen weapons. Australopithecines, he argued, had been ferocious bone club-wielding hunters. The dent fractures on antelope bones in the Makapansgat assemblage were, Dart said, the marks of small bipeds wielding horn cores and broken femurs. He gave the supposed culture a Greek-rooted name, osteodontocheratic, meaning culture of the bone, the tooth, and the horn. He turned the Australopithecines into proto-warriors and the caves into their armories. Brain looked at the same bones and asked simpler questions. What kinds of marks do leopard teeth leave on bone? What kinds of marks do hyena teeth leave on bone? What kinds of marks does gravity leave when a body falls into a fissure? What kinds of marks does water leave when sediment flows over a long-buried bone? He built reference collections of carnivore-modified bones from modern African ecosystems. He compared them, mark by mark, against the Makapansgat material. The dent fractures, Brain showed, were not weapon marks. They were carnivore tooth marks, with a small but important contribution from sediment compaction. The supposed clubs were the bones of prey, modified by the predators that had killed them. The Makapansgat assemblage was not a record of Australopithecine warriors. It was a record of Australopithecine prey, mixed with the prey of the predators that had brought everything together. Brain extended the analysis across the South African cave system. Site after site, the same pattern emerged. The cave was not a habitation. The cave was a death pit. Bones accumulated below trees that overhung the fissures, where leopards had carried prey. Bones accumulated where porcupines had collected and gnawed them. Bones accumulated where hyenas had used the cave as a den. Bones accumulated where bodies had fallen into vertical shafts and been buried by the slow infill of sediment over millennia. The mechanism most relevant to our story is the leopard tree mechanism. A leopard kills a hominin or another medium-sized primate. The leopard, behaving as modern leopards behave, drags the carcass into a tree to eat it away from hyenas. The tree happens to overhang a vertical fissure in the dolomite, a fissure that, 2 million years later, will be excavated and called a famous cave. As the leopard feeds, pieces of the carcass drop. Skull fragments, long bones, teeth. Over centuries and millennia of repeated leopard use of the same trees, the bones in the fissure accumulate. The cave fills, slowly, with leopard prey. Most of the famous early hominin fossils of southern Africa accumulated this way. Not all, there are alternative mechanisms, but most. The hominins in the cave are mostly there because something with 4 legs put them there. This realization redrew the field. The cave was not a home. The cave was a larder. The hominins in the cave were not the residents. The hominins in the cave were the residue. It is worth pausing on what this realization cost the field, emotionally as much as intellectually. For half a century, paleoanthropology had imagined our ancestors as small heroes, proto-people on the brink of becoming us, cooperating, hunting, sheltering, beginning the ascent to civilization. Brain's analysis demoted them to prey. The cave was no longer the proud first human home. The cave was the place where leopards left bones. The Australopithecines were no longer the makers of the bone clubs and bone weapons that Dart had imagined. The Australopithecines were what was eaten. For some senior figures of mid-20th century anthropology, the demotion was hard to absorb. Brain documented his evidence with such patience and methodological care that the field eventually had no choice. The new picture became consensus by the early 1990s. There are alternative cave accumulation mechanisms. Hyena dens, particularly pachycrocota dens, can produce bone assemblages with a similar sort of bias toward medium-sized prey. Porcupine dens contribute heavily gnawed bone. Water flow deposits gather bone from a wide catchment and concentrate it in a single sink. Deliberate mortuary behavior, the hypothesis advanced for Homo naledi at Rising Star, is also possible, though it remains debated. Each cave site has to be analysed on its own taphonomic merits. The implication for our story is enormous. It means the early hominin fossil record is, in large part, a record of which species the local predators happened to kill and where the local predators happened to drop the remains. Our knowledge of Australopithecus and Paranthropus and early Homo is filtered through the diets of leopards and hyenas and crowned eagles. The animals that ate our ancestors are, whether or not we choose to acknowledge it, the co-authors of paleoanthropology. Pause on that for a moment. Without the leopards, the hominin fossil record of southern Africa would be far thinner. Without the crowned eagles, we would not have the town child. Without the pachycrocota hyenas of the Caucasus, we would not have Dmanisi as we know it. The predators who killed our ancestors AG are the reason we have the bones to study them. The story of our origins, in this sense, is a story we know mostly from what was left after we were eaten. This is the strange, uncomfortable centre of paleoanthropology. The field's greatest treasures are the body parts the predators did not finish. And there is a corollary that we will explore in the next part. If we know our ancestors largely from their leftovers, what was it actually like to be one of them? What was a typical night, a typical evening, a typical hour after sundown on the Pliocene savanna for a small bipedal ape with no fire and no spear? We are going to walk into one of those nights now. Part 8. The Night Terrors. Sundown comes fast at low latitudes. On the Pliocene savanna of East Africa, the day burned down across a long horizon. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the night came on with a completeness that no city dweller alive today has ever experienced. There were no electric lights. There was no fire. There was, in the night sky, only stars and the moon, if it was up, and beneath those stars, an open mosaic of grass and woodland and low cover, in which everything that wanted to eat your kind was just becoming active. What did a small group of Australopithecines, or early Homo, do at sundown? The answer is informed, partly, by what we know modern apes do, and partly by what taphonomy and comparative primatology can reconstruct. They climbed. Wherever there were trees, they climbed. Modern chimpanzees build sleeping nests in trees every night, weaving fresh platforms of branches at heights of 10 to 30 meters. Gorillas build ground nests, but only because their body size and group composition deters most predators. Baboons sleep on cliff faces, tucked into ledges out of leopard reach. Across the primate order, the rule is unambiguous. If you can sleep above the ground, sleep above the ground. Australopithecus and early Homo were almost certainly tree sleepers. Their feet although increasingly bipedal, retained climbing capability for millions of years after full upright posture had emerged. Their arms remained relatively long. Their grip strength, by measurement of skeletal robusticity, was substantial. They could and did climb. And in trees, they were safer. Not safe, safer. Even in trees, the predator pressure did not stop. Leopards are excellent climbers. They are the only large African cat that habitually carries prey into trees, and that ability runs both ways. A leopard could and did, on at least some nights, climb into a hominin's sleeping tree. Pythons could too. Crowned eagles, in some places and seasons, hunted at first light and could pluck a small primate from a roost. The trees were a layer of insulation against predation, not an answer to it. Now think about the group structure, a band of 15 or 20 hominins climbing into nearby trees as the light fades. Older animals on the periphery, where the predator most likely strikes first. Vulnerable animals, small children, sick or injured adults, at the center, surrounded by sleeping bodies. Some kind of intermittent vigilance. A few sleepers waking, looking, listening, before falling back to sleep. The group does not sleep all at once. It sleeps in shifts. This pattern, by the way, is observable in modern humans. Most contemporary hunter-gatherer societies sleep in segmented patterns, with periodic wakings during the night, and the unconscious assumption that someone, somewhere in the camp, is alert. The phrase first sleep and second sleep, used in pre-industrial European writing, may carry a memory of the same structure. The continuous 8-hour sleep typical of modern industrial societies may be the recent anomaly, not the default. There is something almost unbearable about imagining the practical mechanics of these arrangements. A sleeping Australopithecine in a tree branch is an animal whose grip strength has to remain partially active even in heavy sleep. Modern chimpanzees achieve this by building a nest platform that supports the body weight without the sleeper having to maintain a grip. Hominins probably did similarly, weaving small platforms of branches and leaves at chosen heights. Whether infants were tied or carried in slings, whether the elderly were given protected positions, whether some kind of rotation system kept some band members awake at all times, none of this is preserved in any fossil record. We can only infer from modern primate analogues and from the architecture of the human body, which still bears traces of arboreal sleep in the slight curl of the resting fingers and in the alarm responses to falling sensations during the descent into sleep. There is another data point. Modern humans sleep around 7 hours per night, on average, when allowed to sleep freely. Chimpanzees sleep around 10. Orangutans sleep around 11. Across the great apes, the African and Asian outliers all sleep substantially longer than we do. One hypothesis, developed by the anthropologist David Sampson and colleagues over the last decade, is that human sleep has been compressed evolutionarily. Shorter, denser, more efficient sleep is a predator evasion adaptation. If you cannot stay safe for 10 hours in a tree, sleep for 7 on the ground with a guard system. Layer onto this the absence of fire. The earliest reasonably good evidence for controlled fire use comes from sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dated to around 1 million years ago. Earlier evidence is suggestive but contested. Consistent hearth structures appear later, 300 to 400,000 years ago. For the first 6 million years of hominin existence, our ancestors had no fire. The night was not lit. Smoke did not push back the predator. The eye reflections in the cover were unobserved. When fire arrived, it changed the equation. A fire is a wall of heat and light and smoke that almost no large predator will willingly cross. A fire holds the camp together against the dark. A fire allows sleep on the ground in numbers that would otherwise be too vulnerable. A fire, although it is most famous for cooking, may have been an anti-predator tool first. Try to feel what a pre-fire night actually was like. A small band of bipedal apes high in a tree, 20 meters above the ground, with the wind moving through the canopy, no light. Stars visible through gaps in the leaves. The occasional sound of something moving in the cover below. A hyena's whoop, far off. A leopard's cough, closer. The breath of the animals around you. The body of the small one curled against your side. The constant low background of fear. Not panic, not constant terror. Something more like the steady tone a string in tension makes when you tap it gently. The whole group, all night, vibrating at that pitch. Multiply that night across millions. Tens of thousands of generations of hominins, going up into trees at sundown, going down at first light, surviving the night because they had each other and had nowhere else to go. Most made it through. A small fraction, in any given night, did not. The ones who did not are the ones whose bones we find. The fear of the dark we still carry, the instinctive scan of the periphery, the hesitation at the edge of cover. The way most people will not walk through tall grass in unfamiliar country at night without a tightening in the chest, may all be the inheritance of those nights. We did not evolve as creatures who were comfortable in the dark. We evolved as creatures who survived the dark. And the body, even the modern human body, in a lit apartment in a lit city, still remembers. If the night shaped our behavior over those millions of years, what did it shape in our bodies? In the next part, we are going to look at the question of how being prey reshaped the human animal. Our vision, our communication, our group structure, our gait, possibly even our face. Almost everything that defines us, it turns out, may carry some fingerprint of having been hunted. Part 9. The body that predation built. Begin with a simple question, the kind that takes a whole episode to take seriously. How much of our species was sculpted by the experience of being prey? We tend to think of our defining traits as products of triumph. Our brains, the textbooks say, grew because we were tool users and meat eaters. Our bipedal posture was a thermoregulatory adaptation or a foraging strategy. Our complex sociality was the architecture of cooperative hunting. The man-the-hunter framework treats almost everything that makes us human as the consequence of being good at killing other animals. And there is real evidence behind some of those claims, particularly for the late stages of hominin evolution. But the longer we look at the early stages, the 4 million years of Australopithecines and the early human genus, the long phase before fire and before sophisticated weapons, the harder it becomes to ignore an alternative reading. Many of our defining traits may have been shaped, at least in part, by the daily fact of being hunted. Take vision. Among mammals, primates have unusually high acuity color vision and forward-facing eyes. The standard explanation is that this combination is good for picking ripe fruit out of foliage and grasping branches accurately. But Lynn Isbell, in her 2009 book The Fruit, the Tree, and the Serpent, made a different and more provocative argument. Primate vision, she said, evolved partly to detect snakes. Constricting snakes have hunted primates for around 60 million years, since before the modern primate radiation began. The snakes are well camouflaged against vegetation, and they kill silently. A primate that cannot see a snake against bark is dead. A primate that can spot a snake at a distance has a survival edge that compounds across generations. Isbell tested the prediction with experiments. Macaques and humans show faster fear responses to snake images than to comparable non-snake stimuli, even when the participants are not consciously aware of having seen a snake. The neural circuitry seems primed for the detection. We see snakes faster than we see almost anything else. That faster-than-conscious response is, on Isbell's reading, a fingerprint of 60 million years of being prey to constrictors. Now take the white sclera. We are the only primate with bright white sclera around the iris. Other apes have pigmented sclera that hides the direction of their gaze. Why are we different? The cooperative eye hypothesis, developed by Michael Tomasello and colleagues, proposes that white sclera evolved to make our gaze direction visible to other members of our group. Visible gaze allows silent communication. A hunter can direct a partner's attention to prey without speaking. A father can warn a child about danger with a glance. And, relevant to our story, a sentinel can silently direct an entire band's attention to a predator in cover. The white sclera made anti-predator vigilance more efficient. Take alarm calls. Vervet monkeys have separate alarm calls for leopard, eagle, and snake. Each call triggers a different escape response: climb up, climb down, look down. The calls are stable across generations, learned by infants from adults, and are arguably the simplest possible model of the relationship between specific symbols and specific external reference. Some linguists have argued that alarm calls are the deepest evolutionary roots of language. If they are right, then the structure of human grammar may carry, somewhere underneath, the architecture of millions of years of warning each other about predators. Take group size. The British anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed in the 1990s that there is a cognitive ceiling on the size of stable social groups, governed by neocortex size of around 150 individuals. The Dunbar number has been tested and contested in many forms since. What is less often discussed is the original evolutionary pressure that pushed primate group size in the first place. For most of primate evolution, the answer is predation. Larger groups confuse predators. Larger groups share the burden of vigilance. Larger groups mob predators when needed. Larger groups detect predators sooner. The cognitive architecture that allows us to track 150 social relationships at once may, at root, be a predator evasion system. Take bipedalism. The reasons our ancestors stood up on two legs are still debated. The dominant models emphasize thermoregulation, exposing less skin to overhead sun, and energy economy in long-distance travel. Predator detection has been argued as a contributing factor. An upright animal can see further over tall grass than a quadruped can. The ability to free the hands for throwing, much later, becomes a defensive and offensive tool. But the primary drivers of upright posture were almost certainly other selective pressures, with anti-predator advantages as a secondary benefit. The honest reading is that bipedalism may have been useful against predators, but probably did not evolve mainly because of them. Take endurance running. Daniel Lieberman and colleagues have argued that humans have evolved a uniquely high-quality endurance running phenotype. Long legs, narrow pelvis, low shoulders, huge sweating capacity, springy Achilles tendons. The standard adaptive story is persistence hunting, in which humans run prey into heat exhaustion. That story applies to the late stages of human evolution. Earlier, the same physiology may have helped a hunted ape outlast a single sprinting predator that could not regulate heat as well. Most carnivores have to stop and pant. A human can run through midday without overheating. That is, in part, an anti-predator trait. Take the smooth, hairless skin and the dense subcutaneous sweat glands. The thermal regulation explanation is dominant. But hairlessness is also useful for ectoparasite detection. Fleas, ticks, lice, leeches all become more visible on bare skin, and parasite load was, in the Pleistocene, a survival pressure of its own. A hairless animal can also be more easily inspected by another member of the group, which means social grooming becomes a more efficient mutual care activity. The cooperative grooming culture of modern primates, which builds and reinforces social bonds and reduces parasite load simultaneously, sits at the intersection of two old pressures, predation and infection. Pull these threads together, and a pattern emerges. Vision, communication, sociality, sleep, gait, skin. Many of the traits that define the human body and the human mind may carry, at least in part, the marks of having been prey. We are a species shaped by what was trying to eat us as much as by what we were trying to eat. The textbook image of evolution as the upward march of the great hunter is, for the long opening portion of our history, the wrong picture entirely. If our bodies and minds were shaped by predation pressure for so long, the moment we began to push back was a moment as significant as any in our history. The shift from hunted to hunter did not happen in a single day or a single millennium. It happened slowly, in pieces, across a span of 2 million years, with stone and fire and projectile and group action. In the next part, we are going to walk through that turning. We are going to watch a species learn to fight back. Part 10. The Turning. When did humans stop being prey? It is the question this whole episode has been working toward. And the honest answer is the answer the dossier always gives. There was no single moment. There was no sharp line. There was a long, slow gradient across roughly 2 million years, with overlapping technologies and overlapping behaviors, in which a small, upright ape gradually accumulated the means to make the predators afraid of it. Begin with the earliest stone tools. The Lemekwi tools from West Turkana in Kenya, described by Sonia Harmond and colleagues in 2015, push the earliest known stone tool industry back to 3.3 million years ago. They are crude, hammered flakes, anvil-broken cobbles, the basic mechanical breaking of one rock with another, but they are unambiguously tools. Some predate the earliest known Homo fossils, suggesting that stone tool use began among Australopithecines. The older one industry, dated from about 2.6 million years ago, expanded the kit: choppers, scrapers, simple flakes. Then the Acheulean, beginning around 1.76 million years ago at the Kokisele site in Kenya, introduced the hand axe, a teardrop-shaped biface that would persist with little fundamental change across more than 1 million years and 3 continents. These early tools were not weapons in the strict sense of objects designed to kill another animal at distance. They were processing tools. They butchered carcasses. They cracked bones to extract marrow. They cut hides. They sharpened sticks. The early hominin transition to a more carnivorous diet was made possible not by cooperative hunting in the modern sense, but by something simpler: scavenging the leftovers of larger predators. Imagine the scenario. A pride of lions makes a kill. They eat what they want. They leave the carcass partly consumed, walking away to digest. Hyenas arrive next, processing softer tissues and easier bones. Saber-toothed cats, if they are in the area, may have killed the prey themselves and left even more meat behind. By the time scavengers have done their cycle, what remains is mostly long bone with marrow inside, high-quality lipid, locked behind a shell of bone that no cat or hyena can crack as efficiently as a stone hammer. A hominin with a stone hammer and the courage to walk into the post-kill site can extract that marrow. The risk is real. Hyenas may still be in the area. The hominin must move fast. It must crack bones quickly. It must carry pieces away to a safer site. But the lipid yield is enormous, and the technology required is minimal. This is, on the marrow cracking model, the entry point into human carnivory. We did not start by killing big animals. We started by stealing fat from the kills of bigger predators. Then comes fire. The earliest evidence is contested, but the Wonderwerk cave deposits in South Africa, dated to around 1 million years ago, contain plausible signs of in situ burning. Gesher Beno Yaakov in Israel, around 790,000 years ago, has stronger evidence. Beech's Pit in England, around 400,000 years ago, has clear hearths. By the time Schöningen, Germany, was deposited around 300,000 years ago, fire was a routine human technology. What did fire change? Almost everything. It cooked food, releasing more calories from less mass. It pushed back the night, allowing safer ground sleep. It hardened wooden spear points, an early step toward weapons. It killed parasites and pathogens. It signaled territory across distance. And it altered the calculus of predation. A fire-tending human band was no longer easy prey for a leopard or a hyena. The predators, on average, learned to avoid fire. The Schöningen site itself preserves the next critical step. In 1994, archaeologists in a German lignite mine recovered a series of wooden spears dated to around 300,000 years ago. They were balanced like javelins. They were preserved in waterlogged Pleistocene sediments and shaped from spruce. They were, beyond reasonable doubt, throwing weapons. Throwing weapons change everything about the predator-prey equation. A hominin without throwing weapons can only fight at arm's length and is outclassed by every large carnivore at that range. A hominin with throwing weapons can hurt a leopard or a sabretooth at 10 or 15 meters. The predator can now be made to pay a cost for hunting humans. Across enough generations, predators that target hominins are selected against. The animals that did not learn to avoid us were the animals that died. Cooperative hunting accelerated this shift. Site after site of butchered megafauna shows that, by 500,000 years ago, hominins were taking down prey larger than themselves through coordinated group action. Mammoth, rhinoceros, horse. The kill sites at Boxgrove in England, Schöningen in Germany, Olorgesailie in Kenya, and many others document a species that had become a serious cooperative predator while still living in landscapes containing sabretooths and giant hyenas. By the late Pleistocene, the equation tipped further. Anatomically modern humans, equipped with bows and atlatls and long-distance social networks, dispersed across every continent except Antarctica. The predator guild around them began to collapse. Cave bear, cave lion, cave hyena, saber-toothed cat, dire wolf, short-faced bear, all gone by 12,000 years ago. The Pleistocene end is not a clean human victory. Climate change degraded prey populations. Glaciation reorganized entire biomes. But human pressure on prey species, and possibly on the predators directly through competition, was a contributing factor. The shift was a gradient. There is no single year, no single millennium in which our ancestors stopped being prey. There are progressive thresholds: the first stone tool, the first scavenged kill, the first reliable fire, the first throwing spear, the first bow, the first organized hunting party. Each one shifted the balance further. Across 2 million years, a small bipedal ape went from a creature that climbed trees at sundown to a creature whose presence on a continent could rearrange the carnivore community. Reflect, for a moment, on the moral asymmetry. We spent 5 million years afraid of the dark. We have spent the last 50,000 making the dark afraid of us. Almost everything in our cultural record, our myths, our fairy tales, our religions, our political imagery, comes from the second phase. Our self-image is the self-image of the apex predator. But our underlying biology, our brains and bodies and reflexes and dreams, was assembled by the first phase. We carry, inside the species we now are, the species we used to be. Act 3 of this story is going to step back from the long arc and look at 5 recent paleontological and biological discoveries from the last year, in real paleontology, in real labs, that bear on what we have just walked through: new hominin fossils, new saber-tooth analyses, new crocodile material, new climate work. Each one is a fragment of the ongoing scientific conversation about our ancient past. Each one is part of how the old picture is being rewritten in real time. We are going to look at the first of those now. Part 11, the hominin family tree, still unfinished. Step back, for a moment, from the predator-prey question and look at the wider hominin community of the Pleistocene, because one of the things paleontology keeps confirming, year by year, is that there were a lot of us. The popular picture of a single linear lineage, Australopithecus to Homo habilis to Homo erectus to us, is misleading. The real picture, especially in East and Southern Africa, between 3 million and 1.5 million years ago, is a bush of overlapping species, sometimes within walking distance of each other. In any given square kilometre of Pliocene rift, you might have had Australopithecus afarensis at one phase. You might have had Australopithecus africanus, or A. sediba, or A. anamensis in another. You had the robust Australopithecines, Paranthropus boisei in East Africa, and Paranthropus robustus in the south, with their massive jaws and small brains. You had early Homo in at least 2 and possibly more species, with their lighter builds and larger brains. At certain windows, 3 or 4 hominin species coexisted in the same broad biome. Each of them was prey for the same predator guild. Each of them carried, within its lifetime, the daily tax of being a small, upright primate in a continent of much bigger carnivores. Each of them left, in the cave deposits and the river edge sediments, the same diagnostic puncture marks and bite traces and dragged bone signatures that we have been walking through. Recent paleontology, by which I mean work published in the last 12 months or so, has continued to fill in this picture. Multiple major journals have run papers in 2025 and into 2026 on new specimens, on revised dating of older specimens, on the application of new analytical techniques to material that has been sitting in museum drawers for decades. East African sites in Kenya and Ethiopia keep producing fragments. South African cave sites keep yielding new dental and postcranial elements as excavations continue. Newer geographic regions, Eritrea, parts of the Arabian Peninsula, southwest China, are beginning to feature in the conversation as well. I want to be careful here, because paleoanthropology is a field where new specimens are sometimes overhyped, and a single phalanx or a single tooth occasionally gets the press cycle of a complete skeleton. The more responsible reading is to look for the broader pattern. The broader pattern across the recent literature is consistent. The hominin family tree of the Plio-Pleistocene was busier than the textbooks of the 1970s and 80s suggested. There were more species at any given moment. There were more episodes of geographic overlap. There were probably some genetic exchanges between lineages that we have only just begun to detect through ancient DNA and proteomics. What does this mean for the predation story? It means the predator guild had a richer menu of bipedal apes than even the cave deposits indicate. Multiple species with overlapping body sizes, sharing the same waterholes, the same trees, the same trails, the same predator pressures. The leopards and crocodiles and crowned eagles of the Plio-Pleistocene were not selecting between one hominin and the rest of the savanna fauna. They were selecting between several hominins, alongside several similar-sized non-hominin prey species on a daily basis. The methodological tools that have produced the recent picture deserve a moment as well. Microcomputed tomography, or micro-CT, allows researchers to examine the internal structure of fossil bones and teeth without destroying them. Stable isotope analysis of fossil tooth enamel reveals what an individual ate, broadly, during the years its teeth were forming. Electron spin resonance dating provides reliable ages for material that is too old for radiocarbon and too young for some other techniques. Synchrotron imaging illuminates fossils at sub-micrometer resolution. Each of these tools has advanced through the last decade, and each has been turned, recently, on classic specimens to reveal information the original describers could not have accessed. The result is a continuous stream of small revisions. A specimen previously assigned to one species is reattributed to another. A specimen previously dated to one age is redated. A specimen previously thought to belong to a single individual turns out to belong to two. A specimen previously thought to lack carnivore traces, when scanned with finer resolution, reveals previously invisible bite marks. The story of human origins is in constant adjustment, and adjustment is healthy. It means the field is alive. Ancient DNA, in particular, has reshaped this field, beyond anything that the original 20th century paleoanthropologists could have imagined. The genomes of late archaic hominins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and unidentified populations, called only by their genetic signatures, have been recovered from bones, teeth, and even from cave floor sediment without any visible bone at all. Recent papers in the last 12 months have continued to refine the picture of who interbred with whom and when. The honest summary is that the late Pleistocene human community was a mosaic of populations exchanging genes more frequently than the textbooks of even 10 years ago acknowledged. Several percent of the genome of every non-African human alive today carries inheritance from Neanderthal ancestors. Smaller fractions in some Asian and Oceanian populations carry inheritance from Denisovans. Even smaller fractions in some sub-Saharan African populations carry inheritance from a so far unidentified archaic lineage that has not left bones we can study. What this means, in the predator-prey frame of this episode, is that the late Pleistocene predator guild was hunting a population of overlapping, interbreeding, partly distinct hominin lineages, and that whoever the predators caught was sometimes someone whose ancestry contained more than one named species. The neat species labels of the textbooks are partly a convenience of bone fragments and partly a real biological boundary. The predators of the time would not have cared. There is, threaded through this work, an ethical and political shift that deserves explicit acknowledgement. African paleoanthropology, for most of the 20th century, was carried out by Western expeditions extracting fossils for Western museums. The last quarter century has seen a steady, important transition toward African-led fieldwork, African museum repatriation, African scientists publishing as senior authors. Kenyan, Ethiopian, Tanzanian, and South African institutions are now central to the field rather than auxiliary. The fossils that emerge from East African sites today emerge through the labour of scientists whose ancestors actually evolved on those landforms. That is, in a small but real way, a closing of a long colonial loop. Bring this back to the calm thread of the documentary. Amid all the controversy, amid the species splitting and lumping, amid the reassessments of the last year, the bones keep coming. Every season of fieldwork in East Africa produces material. Every analysis of museum specimens turns up details that were missed before. The picture of who we are and where we came from is not finished, and probably will never be. Among the fossils that keep coming, of course, are not only the bones of hominins, they are also the bones of the predators that hunted us. And in the next part, we are going to step into one of the recent papers that has expanded what we know about the most charismatic of those predators, the cat with the famous teeth, the sabretooth. Part 12. The sabretooth that came back. The sabretooth cats are among the most famous extinct animals on the planet. Their iconic upper canines have stamped them into popular culture in a way few other Pleistocene predators have managed. Cartoons, museum dioramas, action figures, animated films, the sabretooth, usually under the name of the New World genus Smilodon, has become a kind of stand-in for Pleistocene predation as a whole. The reality is more interesting and more complicated. There were several lineages of saber-toothed cats across the Pleistocene of 3 continents. There was Meganterion, the squat, long-sabred ambush predator that overlapped with our African ancestors. There was Homotherium, the longer-legged scimitar tooth that roamed Eurasia and reached as far as the New World. There was Dinophilis, the medium-sized cat we explored in Act 1, and there was Smilodon, which arose later in the Americas and grew in S. populator to the largest body size of any cat that has ever lived. Each of these animals was a serious predator, capable of killing prey larger than itself, and each of them, in different combinations and in different time windows, lived alongside hominins. Recent paleontology has continued to refine our picture of these cats. In the last 12 months alone, several papers have appeared that adjust what we thought we knew. Some have addressed body size estimates from new postcranial material. Some have applied isotope analysis to dentine to reconstruct diet. Some have used finite element modeling to test whether the famous canines were actually as fragile as earlier reconstructions suggested. The results, taken together, are a portrait of cats that were more capable, more behaviorally varied, and probably more socially organized than the older textbooks suggested. The most consequential recent thread for our story has been around Homotherium. The scimitar tooth had been thought, for most of the late 20th century, to have gone extinct in Europe by around 200,000 years ago, and across the rest of its range somewhat later. Then, in the early 2000s, a Homotherium jaw was dredged up from the bed of the North Sea. Radiocarbon dating placed it at around 28,000 years old. The implication was that Homotherium, once thought safely extinct before modern humans entered Europe in any density, had in fact survived alongside Cro-Magnon Europeans well into the late Pleistocene. Continuing work in this area has been a steady source of the recent literature. Specimens from across northern Eurasia keep getting redated. The picture is of a sabretooth that persisted in low numbers, in cold, open landscapes, hunting the same megafaunal prey that late Pleistocene humans were hunting. Two predator-class species, both intelligent, both probably social, sharing the same prey base in the same biome for thousands of years. What does it look like, that overlap? It looks, almost certainly, like competition. A saber-tooth and a band of modern humans, both attempting to bring down the same horse or the same young mammoth, are in direct conflict. The saber-tooth, by physiology, is better at the killing strike. The humans, by tooling, are better at extracting meat from a kill and defending the kill against scavengers. Each species can probably steal kills from the other under the right conditions. Each species can probably injure or kill members of the other under the right conditions. There is fragmentary evidence in the cave art record that humans of the late Pleistocene knew exactly what they were looking at. Some panels at Chauvet Cave in France, dated to around 32,000 years ago, depict cats with what appear to be elongated upper canines. The interpretation is debated. Some researchers have argued the images are stylized lions rather than realistic sabertooths. But the persistence of the interpretation tells us something. The artists at Chauvet had seen something that they wanted to draw, and what they drew has, for some viewers, an unmistakable sabertooth quality. Reflect, for a moment, on the strange intimacy of those images. Imagine being a late Pleistocene human, 10 meters into a torchlit cave, with a stick of charcoal in your hand, drawing the predator that lived in your country. People who had reason to fear those animals took the time, in unpleasant conditions, to render them on stone walls. They knew what they were looking at. They wanted, for reasons we can speculate about but cannot fully recover, to keep an image of it alive. Place that against the recent paleobiology. The saber-tooth canines were, on finite element modeling, weaker in side-to-side loading than modern conical-toothed cats, but well adapted for the strict throat slash that ancient skull biomechanics suggest was their kill mode. The cats stabilized prey with their forequarters, heavily muscled, oversized for the body, and delivered a precise carotid bite. They did not crush skulls, they opened arteries. The blood loss was the killing mechanism, not the bite force. Late Pleistocene humans, hunting the same megafauna, had to coexist with this animal. We do not know whether they succeeded by avoiding saber-tooth ranges, or by displacing saber-tooths from prime habitats, or by directly competing for kills. The recent literature suggests all three at different times and places. The very last saber-tooth populations vanish around 12,000 years ago, alongside many other late Pleistocene predators, in the Great Extinction Reorganization we will discuss in Part 14. A separate strand of recent paleobiology has been the question of saber-tooth sociality. In the New World, genus Smilodon, the famous La Brea tar pits in California, have preserved hundreds of individuals in a single trapped assemblage, and the demographic profile, too many adults, not enough juveniles, too many males of certain age classes, has been argued by several researchers to indicate that Smilodon hunted in social groups. Pack-hunting cats are unusual but not unprecedented. Modern lions are the obvious analogue. Recent isotope work, in the last year or two, has continued to support the social hunter interpretation for at least some sabretooth species. If they were social hunters, the threat posed to a group of hominins would have been substantially greater than the threat from a solitary ambush cat. A single meganterion at a kill is dangerous. A coordinated pair of Smilodon, one stabilizing prey while the other delivered the killing throat slash, is a different category of threat altogether. There is also the question of body size. Smilodon populator, the South American species, reached masses of 300 to 400 kilograms, making it the largest cat that has ever lived. It went extinct only at the end of the Pleistocene, alongside the rest of the South American megafauna. Recent analyses of its postcranial skeleton continue to refine the picture of how such an enormous cat moved and hunted. The animal was front-heavy, slow over distance, but lethal at close range. It was the kind of predator that if you encountered one, you would not survive without weapons that human ancestors had only just begun to develop. Quote, in plain language, what this means: we did not stop being prey by force alone. We stopped being prey because the animals that hunted us went extinct, and we played some part in that. The sabertooth's disappearance is not an unalloyed human triumph. It is, in part, the loss of a predator-class species that had lived for millions of years on this planet. The world is quieter and emptier since. But the sabertooth was not the only ancient predator that watched our species emerge. There was an older lineage, an older killer that has been on this planet for over 200 million years and is still here today, the crocodile. And in the next part, we are going to step into a recent crocodilian paper that adjusts what we thought we knew about that lineage. Part 13. A crocodile story from long ago. The crocodilians are among the strangest of the world's surviving lineages. They are not living fossils, in the sense that they have stopped evolving. They have evolved continuously since the time of the non-avian dinosaurs, but their basic body plan has been so durable and so fit for purpose that the crocodile of the Cretaceous would be recognizable to a modern crocodile biologist. The arrangement of the snout, the bite, the eye, the dorsal armor, the tail, the cloacal anatomy, the four-chamber crocodilian-only blood-routing valve in the chest, all of these were settled, more or less, 200 million years ago. Modern paleontology has, in the last decade, and especially in the last year, complicated the simple picture of crocodile equals river edge ambush predator. There were, in the Mesozoic and into the Cenozoic, terrestrial crocodilians that ran like dogs, marine crocodilians that swam like sharks, dwarf crocodilians that climbed, and herbivorous crocodilians that ate plants. The lineage diversified into ecological roles that have no modern equivalents. Recent papers across the last 12 months have continued to add to this catalogue, with new descriptions from South American Cretaceous deposits, from the African Eocene, and from the Pleistocene of the Mediterranean. I want to focus on the lineage most relevant to our story, the African Crocodilus complex of the Pleo-Pleistocene, which produced Crocodilus, Anthropophagus, and several other large-bodied species that overlapped with hominin evolution. Recent work on this complex has been steady, with several papers in the last year applying new analytical methods to the Olduvai material and to comparable assemblages in Kenya, Ethiopia, and southern Africa. Phylogeographic analysis, using fossil morphology and, where available, ancient DNA from preserved scute material, is beginning to clarify which Pleo-Pleistocene crocodile species are ancestral to modern Nile crocodiles, which are dead-end side branches, and which have been lumped together that should be split, or split that should be lumped. The picture, like the hominin picture, is messier than the textbooks have suggested. The most relevant biological angle is bite force estimation. Modern Nile crocodiles, the largest of which exceed 5 meters, generate bite forces in the region of 15 to 20,000 newtons. That is among the highest measured bite forces of any living animal. Crocodilus anthropophagus, scaled by comparative skull morphology, would have generated comparable or higher figures. A bite of 20,000 newtons is more than enough to crush a femur, more than enough to amputate a limb, and far more than enough to drown a hominin who has not yet drowned of its own accord. Recent studies on mandibular sensory pits, the small pressure-sensing pits in the lower jaw of crocodiles that allow them to detect the slightest movement in murky water, have suggested that Pleistocene crocodilus species had ambush ecology functionally identical to that of their modern descendants. They were, in the crocodile sense, complete. 2 million years has not made them more dangerous. They were already optimal. This has an unsettling implication. The threat at the lake margin 2 million years ago is, in pure biological terms, the same threat at the lake margin today. Pleistocene crocodiles were not slower, not weaker, not less precise than modern crocodiles. They were larger in some species, and they had access to a different prey base, but the fundamental ambush profile was identical. The man-eater of Olduvai is not a curiosity from a remote past. The man-eater of Olduvai is the same animal as the Nile crocodile that took someone from a riverbank in Central Africa last week. Look at the modern toll. Nile crocodiles kill several hundred people every year on the African continent. Most counts cluster in the high hundreds, with significant underreporting. Saltwater crocodiles add further dozens of fatalities across Southeast Asia and northern Australia. Dwarf crocodiles, mugger crocodiles, American crocodiles, and others contribute smaller but non-zero numbers. The Pleistocene riverside ambush is not a fossil scenario. It is yesterday's news and tomorrow's news in the parts of the world where the rivers have not yet been engineered out of natural flow. Reflect on the asymmetry. 2.5 million years of Olduvai-like riverside encounters are still encoded in our instincts. Most people, regardless of upbringing, hesitate at brown water. Most people, regardless of upbringing, scan the surface of a still pool before stepping in. The fear is not learned in childhood. It comes pre-installed. It comes pre-installed because the Pleistocene was not gentle on those who did not have it. Recent work has also expanded what we know about the range of body sizes in the African Pleistocene crocodilians. The Olduvai assemblage alone has produced material from at least 3 different species, of overlapping but distinct ecological niches, one large ambush predator like Crocodilus anthropophagus, one slim-snouted fish specialist of more modest size, and one mid-sized opportunist. The riverside hominin of 2 million years ago was not facing a single crocodile. The riverside hominin of 2 million years ago was facing a community of crocodiles, each adapted to a slightly different prey base, with the largest of them taking everything from buffalo to hippo to passing primate. Discuss, briefly, the broader strangeness of the crocodilian lineage. Crocodiles and alligators have been observed in modern field studies to use tools in a primitive sense. They balance sticks on their snouts during nesting season to lure birds searching for nesting material. They have been observed to cooperate during hunting. They have been observed to vocalize to embryos in the egg, and the embryos to vocalize back at the moment of hatching. Crocodiles have parental care, including jaw carrying of newly hatched young, for periods that can extend into months. Crocodiles are not, as the popular image has them, dim-witted reptiles. They are slow, long-lived, sensorially capable, and behaviorally complex animals whose intelligence is structured around a different timescale than ours. This brings us to the long-time framing that the recent literature keeps reinforcing. If a crocodilus-class animal could watch the KPG extinction, watch the rise of the modern mammals, watch the hominin lineage emerge, and watch our own dispersals across the planet, then the timescale on which our current dominion really matters is much shorter than we tend to assume. Crocodiles have outlasted nearly every major predator class that has appeared and disappeared during their tenure. They will, in all likelihood, outlast us. And in the meantime, they continue to do what they have always done. The recent crocodile work, then, is not really about a single new species or a single new specimen. It is about confirming, with finer methodology, that the ancient predator was structurally identical to the modern one. The Pleistocene at the lake's edge is still happening. We have only, in most parts of the world, retreated from the lake's edge. In the next part, we will look at the climate forces that, more than human action alone, helped reorganize the entire predator guild around us. Part 14. Climate and Catastrophe. The Pleistocene was not a single climate. It was an oscillation. Over 2.5 million years, the global system swung between glacial and interglacial states, with surface temperature differences of 5 to 7 degrees Celsius, sea level differences of over 100 meters, and biome boundaries that moved by hundreds of kilometers on continental scales. Forests retreated and advanced, grasslands expanded and contracted, ice sheets grew and shrank. The global ecology, including the predator guild, was in continuous reorganization. Recent paleoclimate work has, in the last 12 months, continued to refine the dating and the resolution of those swings. Improved orbital tuning of long African climate records has tightened the chronology of regional aridification events. Antarctic ice core extensions, achieved through new drilling at sites like the Beyond Epica project, have pushed the continuous ice core record further back into time and improved cross-correlation with marine sediment cores. Sediment DNA work, in which ancient DNA preserved in lake-bottom sediments is sequenced to reconstruct past biological communities, has begun to give us community-level pictures of how species composition shifted across glacial-interglacial cycles. The picture, as it sharpens, is one of constant ecological turnover. What did this turnover do to the predator guild? A great deal. In Africa, the long aridification trend across the Pliocene and into the Pleistocene shifted forest predators into more open environments, contracted some specialist niches, and opened others. The robust Australopithecines and the early Homo lineages emerged in the same window in which the savanna mosaic expanded. The sabretooths, the long-faced hyenas, the now extinct cheetah forms, all of them rearranged their ranges and population sizes in step with the climate. Some lineages survived. Some lineages did not. Across Eurasia, glacial advances pushed faunas southward and isolated populations into refugia. The cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, evolved in cold climate refugia and adapted into a strict herbivore over hundreds of thousands of years. The cave lion, Panthera spelaea, occupied a range from Iberia to Beringia. The cave hyena, Crocuta spelaea, was a regional variant of the modern spotted hyena. Each of these animals went through population bottlenecks during glacial maxima and population expansions during interglacials. None of them survived past the very end of the Pleistocene. The end of the Pleistocene is the part of the story that the recent literature has been most active around. Roughly 12,900 years ago, the climate underwent an abrupt cold reversal known as the Younger Dryas. The cause is debated, possibly a meltwater-induced shutdown of North Atlantic circulation, possibly a comet airburst, possibly a combination. What is not debated is that it coincided, on multiple continents, with major megafaunal extinctions. A separate strand of recent work has been on the so-called Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the proposal that a comet or asteroid airburst over North America initiated the cold reversal and contributed to the megafaunal collapse. The hypothesis is contentious. Some teams have reported elevated platinum, microspherules, and shock quartz signatures at the Younger Dryas boundary in multiple cores, while other teams have failed to replicate or have offered alternative explanations for the chemical signals. As of 2026, the hypothesis is neither confirmed nor entirely discarded. What is clear, regardless of trigger, is that something happened at that boundary that pushed an already stressed late Pleistocene biota past a series of recovery thresholds. The mammoth steppe collapsed, the dire wolf disappeared, Smilodon vanished, the short-faced bear vanished, the American horse and the American camel vanished, the cave bear, the cave lion, the cave hyena vanished. Homotherium disappeared from its last refugia. The European wood muskox, the giant deer, the woolly rhinoceros, all gone within a few thousand years of each other. By 12,000 years ago, the late Pleistocene predator guild had been reduced to roughly the predator community we know today: lion, leopard, tiger, hyena, wolf, jaguar, and a handful of smaller carnivores. Recent work in the last year has continued to develop the long debate over what caused the late Pleistocene extinctions. There are two broad camps. The overkill camp, associated with researchers like Paul Martin in earlier decades, and with younger scientists more recently, argues that human hunting was the dominant cause, with the timing of extinctions tracking the arrival of modern humans on each continent. The climate change camp argues that the temperature swings of the late glacial degraded prey populations to the point where they could not recover. The honest current consensus is that both factors operated in different proportions on different continents, and that climate-degraded prey populations were more vulnerable to human hunting pressure than they would otherwise have been. What this means for our predator-prey story is consequential. The end of the Pleistocene is the end of the predator guild that hunted us through the long portion of our evolution. Cave lion, cave bear, cave hyena, saber-toothed cat, dire wolf, short-faced bear, terror bird in South America, marsupial lion in Australia, all gone within a few thousand years of each other. What survived, leopard, lion, tiger, hyena, jaguar, wolf, smaller cats, and various smaller predators, is a small fraction of the late Pleistocene predator richness. The world is less crowded than it used to be. That fact is sometimes told as a triumph and sometimes told as a tragedy. The truth, as the recent literature emphasizes, is more complicated. The Pleistocene predator guild had hunted hominins for millions of years. Its extinction was not an unmixed gift. It was the loss of an entire ecological complex, and with it, the loss of the long evolutionary pressure that had shaped much of who we are. Some of the things in our biology that we discussed in Part 9, our vision, our sociality, our sleep, our sensitivity to certain stimuli, were assembled by predators that no longer exist. We carry adaptations in the year 2026 to threats that vanished 12,000 years ago. There is a final, sober note to take from the climate story. We did not become apex predators in a static world. We became apex predators in a world that was already losing other predators. We are not the lone survivors of a Darwinian competition with homotherium and cave lion and short-faced bear. We are the survivors of a climate-driven ecosystem reorganization, in which we played a contributing role, but in which we were not the only force at work. Our species is, in this sense, a beneficiary of a global catastrophe as much as the agent of one. But the predators we survived have not all gone. The animals we share the world with today still hunt humans in places. And in the final part of this documentary, we are going to walk through the modern map of human predation: the Sundarbans tigers, the Nile crocodiles, the leopards of northern India, the great white sharks of certain coastlines. The legacy of being prey is not over. It has only retreated. And the closing thought of this story is going to be about what that retreat has done to us and what it might still mean. Part 15. The World We Inherit. Step into the Sundarbans, the immense mangrove delta where the Ganges and the Brahmaputra meet the Bay of Bengal. The water is brown and tidal. The trees grow out of the salt-saturated mud on stilt roots. Honey collectors move through the channels in narrow boats, gathering wild honey from hives in the canopy. They wear masks on the back of their heads. The masks are crude, painted faces with wide eyes, and they have a single purpose. The Bengal tigers of the Sundarbans, alone among Indian tiger populations, hunt humans regularly and consistently, and they prefer to ambush from behind. A face on the back of the head, the local fishermen know, makes the tiger hesitate. Sometimes the hesitation is enough to save a life. Several dozen people in the Sundarbans are killed by tigers every year. The exact number varies by source and by year, but the long-running average is well into the dozens, with some estimates running higher when unreported deaths are counted. The Sundarbans is one of the few places on the modern earth where human predation by a large carnivore is a continuous, unsolved feature of life. Honey collectors, fishermen, and forest workers accept it the way our Pliocene ancestors must have accepted leopards. It is a tax on being alive in that biome. Walk further around the modern world. Nile crocodiles, as we discussed, kill several hundred people every year across Central and East Africa. Saltwater crocodiles add further dozens across Southeast Asia and Northern Australia. Polar bears increasingly kill humans in the Arctic as sea ice retreat forces them onto land in summer. Leopards in the northern Indian states of Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh take dozens of people every year, sometimes specializing on individual villages, until a particular animal can be located and removed. Sharks, statistically much rarer, take a handful of swimmers every year along certain coastlines. Mountain lions and wolves, in North America, contribute very small but non-zero numbers. There are historical events within living memory. The Tsavo lions of 1898, the Njombe lion attacks of the 1930s through the 1940s, which killed more than 1,000 people across southern Tanzania before the responsible animals were finally hunted. The Champawat tigress in early 20th century India, credited with over 400 human deaths. These events did not happen in remote prehistory. They happened in the era of railways and photographs. What these modern and recent statistics tell us is that the legacy of being prey did not end. It only retreated. In landscapes where humans dominate the local ecology, most of the planet, large carnivores are absent or pushed into protected areas. In landscapes where the carnivores still have sufficient population and habitat, the Sundarbans, the Central African rivers, certain Indian forests, the Arctic margins, the prey relationship is intact. Even where humans are not currently being hunted, the absence is a recent achievement. Take away the rifles, the cars, the lighting, the roads, the medical care, and the relationship would re-establish itself within a few generations. Reflect on what being prey for so long has done to us. The instinct that scans the dark, the startle reflex, the sleep posture that puts your back to a wall when you can, the way most people will not walk alone past tall grass at night, the way most children, the world over, are afraid of monsters under the bed, the persistence of the wolf in the fairy tale, the persistence of the tiger in the night, the dragon in the cave, the leviathan in the water, the myths and the monsters of every culture, in every climate, return again and again to images of being eaten. The animals are different: wolf, tiger, bear, leopard, croc, snake, bird, shark, beast. But the pattern is one pattern. We tell, even now, the story of being food. Pull out, finally, to the long view. Human dominance over the predator guild is, in long-time terms, very recent. 50,000 years out of 7 million. If the 7 million years of the hominin lineage were compressed into a 24-hour day, the controlled use of fire arrives at around 11:30 p.m. The first throwing weapons arrive around 11:45 p.m. Anatomically modern humans appear around 11:55 p.m. The late Pleistocene megafaunal extinctions happen at around 11:59 p.m. Agriculture is the last 20 seconds. The Industrial Revolution is the last quarter of a second. The era in which a human being could plausibly walk an entire continent without fearing a single predator is something between the last second and the last fraction of a second of that 24-hour day. For the rest, the other 23 hours and 59 minutes, we were prey. The town child, eaten by a crowned eagle 2.8 million years ago, is closer to the average human experience across the long time of our lineage than any modern person reading this is. The mother who lost a child to a leopard at Swartkrans 1,800,000 years ago lived a more representative human life, in evolutionary terms, than the modern parent in a city apartment. We are anomalies. The whole modern human relationship with the world is an anomaly. It is recent, it is contingent, it is reversible. This is not a frightening thought in the end. It is a calming one. The dread we sometimes feel, the residual fear of the dark, the unease at the edge of the woods, the catch in the breath at a sound in the night, none of those are flaws in our wiring. They are the working signals of a system that kept our ancestors alive for millions of years. The system was not always right. Sometimes it was wrong. Sometimes the rustle in the grass was just the wind. But often enough, across enough generations, it was right. And the descendants of those who listened are the ones whose great, many times grandchildren are sitting somewhere, right now, listening to a voice tell them about a small skull that was found in a quarry in 1924. We are, all of us, the descendants of those who were not eaten. Every single human alive today has, in their direct ancestral line, an unbroken sequence of individuals who survived long enough to reproduce. Each of those individuals slept in trees, or with fire, or in groups, or under the watch of someone keeping guard. Each of those individuals was one bad night away from never having descendants. The fear that hums quietly in the back of the modern mind when the wind picks up at dusk and the trees move is not a flaw to be medicated or a weakness to be overcome. It is the inheritance of 7 million years of being lucky. You can sleep now. The world outside is quieter than it used to be, and the creatures that hunted us are, mostly, gone. The bedroom is not a tree. No leopard in the branches, no crocodile in the water, no eagle in the morning. You are the result of 7 million years of careful sleeping. But somewhere, in a mangrove delta, in a brown river, in a forest at the edge of a village, in a high pass in the mountains, the prey relationship is still in operation, more or less unchanged, between a human being and a creature older than agriculture and older than language. They are both, in their separate ways, doing what their ancestors always did. So are we. And the small skull, in the case in Johannesburg, is still there, 2.8 million years old, watching us back. Good night.